Welcome to Integration, Strategies in Business for a World in Flux, where we explore the art of moving forward, not just sustaining, transforming. I'm your host, SamJewel, and I hope you are as inspired by my guests as I am. They come from many different walks of life. The great ones among us do not see setbacks, only the landscape of possibilities. My guests have learned to navigate what is, to find ways to keep going and leave the world better than they found it, so that when the storm comes, they don't just endure, they lean into it. And on that note, I hope you enjoy my guest today. Hi, and welcome. Today we are interviewing Jade Miles, and I'm going to read her bio because it's fabulous. With the bush in her bones and business in her head, Jade Miles is a polyjobist right down to her toes, which are preferably barefoot and muddy. She's been a local food advocate and educator right across the country for the last decade and founded the Beechworth Food Co-op and Northeast Local Food Strategy. That's in Victoria, where I live. In 2020, she launched her podcast, Future Steading, and with 150 episodes spanning 10 seasons now under her belt, she has also released a book with the same name, and her second book, Huddle, is due to launch this month in April 2025. To be sure, she's putting her efforts where her mouth is. Jade is also a regenerative heritage fruit farmer. Together with her husband and 3 kids, Jade runs Black Barn Farm, which she lets people come on to visit. From a childhood sitting quietly by her father's side on Indigenous country out around Australia, Jade went on to teach drama to kids in the bush, hitchhiked through Central America solo, set up locally supplied cafes in Cambodia and Vanuatu, all while dipping back into the old space of strategic development work for values-aligned businesses such as Sustainable Table, where she has been CEO since 2020. Jade joins the dots through the power of storytelling, calling a spade and encouraging us all to redefine success, celebrate simple, and build ritual for community now and for the next 7 generations. And on that note, hello, Jade, and welcome to Integration. So the subject matter, because just in case you're not quite up with what we're doing here, is really the integration of what I consider is the state or flux of the times. And a lot of people are going at things with a lot like what you're doing, getting back to a simpler life, cutting things right back. And other people are stressing out, and other people are, no, this is an opportunity. Let's go more into it. And I sort of feel everyone's got a different way about going at life. So I thought we'd just start by opening up with a little bit about your journey and some of the more challenging things that you've navigated in life and how you might have philosophically addressed how to go about them.
Actually, it probably hasn't evolved that much. I was really lucky to grow up as a permaculture kid. Both of my folks were early adopters of the Bill Mollison and David Holmgren sort of design framework around creating a permanent humanity or a permanent culture, which is what permaculture stands for. I very much, had that embedded in me as a small kiddo, and I was really lucky because my very big families on both my dad's and my mum's side all pretty well lived in a similar community or very, very close by community. And so I had this rough and tumble but deeply community-centered childhood and took lots of those values into my adulthood with me. I wanted to belong deeply to the people in the region. I wanted to understand the landscape I was part of. I wanted that landscape, or I expected that landscape to have capacity to feed me. I understood the seasons. We traded a lot of things. We didn't always play in the monetary system. We were really comfortable to have big conflicting conversations, and we were really comfortable to challenge the status quo and the architecture of authoritarianism. So I kind of grew up as a kid that was given a really solid foundation of beating to a drum that made sense to me. And what made sense to me was anything that spoke to ecological outcomes and a sense of mutual obligation. I was critically aware and made to be critically aware of what that mutual obligation looks like in a community, and that it's not about you, it's about the whole. And so I think that as an underlying way of being is something that still permeates through all of the ways in which I make decisions. Sometimes that can be challenging because we now work in a world that operates at pace, and that pace is sort of not overly conducive to being human at the same time. And we also operate in a world that is far flung. You know, we have global networks now and very easily accessible global networks through the screen at the end of our hand. And so I think that's the underlying philosophy. I moved with my now husband, but then just relatively new boyfriend out of the city and into the country in northeast Victoria. And at that time, we moved on to a plateau that we're still living on, but actually we went away for some years and before we came back. And we learnt there that local food systems were broken and that small scale family owned farms didn't really have a place in the Australian food landscape. Because they just weren't financially viable and they were competing with the lifestyle market of people who were starting to push, the network was starting to push the price of real
Just to
estate
sort
up.
of
And so
clarify
land.
that for some people, 'cause some people may not know what you mean by that. This idea of lifestyle market is really, for listeners who may not understand that concept, is really about this idea of kind of a hobby farm, isn't it? Where you're not really growing or doing anything producing, you're just enjoying it, and then maybe have a work
Yeah, just
offline.
enjoying the land, and you might have a couple of horses and your kids might have a couple of motorbikes. And so generally it happens on smaller acreage. And so, what might have once been a thriving family owned apple orchard, which is in the example here, predominantly what it was at sort of 25 or 30 acres, was no longer able to compete with the commodity production scale orchards of 400, 500 acres further off the hill.
So do you
Yeah.
then take that and break it down so that you find a local market that will buy your local apples? Is that sort of the genesis of how you looked at breaking that hobby thing down and recreating community in basically what seems to be food deserts all over Australia? So I'm sort of curious to see how you approached the problem.
Yeah, so we said to the multi-generational farmer who was selling out at the time and pushing all of his trees out, this is heartbreaking. He said, we can't sell the land to anybody who wants the trees. We'll be better off selling it without the trees. So in come the bulldozers. And then we started to look around and realize that all of the small scale family owned farms that were in a similar position were all bulldozing their trees and selling the land as just empty paddocks. And it really started us off on our journey. We were only 21 at the time, and it started us off on our journey of questioning the food system in its entirety. And so we took ourselves to the States and we had a look around in the Northeast region of America, which has an incredibly strong local food system, in Vermont in particular. And we started to understand what it could look like to bring some of those insights back to our particular region. Um, Jump ahead 15 years, and we had founded a local food co-op that kind of rose and rose and rose, and then actually saw its demise just after COVID. It just couldn't cope with the volunteer nature of it through the COVID
Can I
chaos.
just stop and ask you before you get to that point, how did you get the access to the land to grow the food? Were you just, where was
We
that point?
didn't at that point. So we started a food co-op as consumers. So we were the eaters. And, we're in a regional community. Land wasn't nearly as expensive as it was in other places. We had bought and sold a number of small, very rundown little shacky houses, and we'd renovated them and sold them on and sort of upgraded as we went. But we had also, both of us had started working in the local food movement, really. I was doing a fair bit of contract and consulting work, and my husband is a hydrogeological engineer, and so he was working in that space as well. But then we sold the house that we were raising our kids in and moved to land out here in Stanley, which is where we established Black Barn Farm.
And
And
how old were your
so
kids by this point? How
the
old were your
twins
children?
were 8 and the little one was 4 when we moved out here. And so we started with a bare paddock, essentially. It had been an apple orchard 30 or 40 years prior, and we were the first people to plant apple trees in 40 years. And we used all of the insights that we'd gleaned from our trip to the States to really understand what a really strong, viable, small-scale, family-owned farm could look like. And it meant we needed to stack the business model. It meant that we couldn't just put 1,000 pink ladies in and put it on the back of a truck and send it off to market. So we have built a big black barn, and that barn is where we run all our schools programs, where we run all our upskilling workshops, where we have launched both of my books and do lots of book talks with other authors. We open for UPick, so we are direct to consumer. We also have almost 100 different varieties of apple and pear and quince. And we also have a couple of kilometres of berries that fruit from January right through to almost June.
And the region that you're in also has quite a lot of accommodation, and it's very beautiful up in Beechworth.
So definitely a tourism region.
You get tourists coming through, which other people in other areas wouldn't get that same thing. So there is an accessibility to it.
Intentional. We were really intentional. We didn't want a property that was so big that we couldn't manage it with deep regenerative practices. And that requires us to walk that land every single day and really be observing and interacting with the landscape and understanding what's working, what's not working. We grow biologically, so we're never using synthetic sprays. We hand weed everything. This morning feeling a little bit arthritic in my fingers, and I'm thinking it's going to go as we hand weed into our 60s and 70s. So, it's an intentionally wild environment. We've got lots of understory, and we're adding biology all the time, so we're adding life. So we have a nursery, we have schools programs, we have a retail range where we make our own goat soap and make our own jam and chutneys and make our own organic tea, herbal tea. So we've sort of stacked the system so that there's lots of diversity and lots of avoidance of risk, essentially, so that if we get a really late frost and we lose our apples, or we get bird pressure, or we get fire come through, or, whatever it might be, we get a drought year and we haven't got enough water, whatever it is, we've got the ability to stand on other legs of the milking stool. So that's all been done. What's that?
Contingencies.
Lots of contingencies. And that is great for the business. It can be really difficult for the doers. And so with 3 small kids, and we both have worked off farm in order to establish all of that because we didn't have the money to do it in the first instance. We're first gen farmers, and neither of us will receive inheritance. So I was just saying that we are first gen farmers, and so neither of us inherited a farm, and we certainly didn't inherit any money that enabled us to do this. And so we had the joy of having to operate kind of a dual life for about a decade. We're just at the end of that decade now, where we have had to work off farm almost full time, and then on farm almost full time to make it work. And that is definitely not something that many people would have appetite to do. And so, if I'm really honest, it's nearly killed us as well. But we had a really, really strong vision. And even though it was a big vision and one that was somewhat exhausting, we were both really committed to the outcome of it. And so now we've got all of the orchard established, all of the berries established, all of our kind of homestead function rolling. The black barn is up, our schools program is strong, and our events ebb and flow as we've got capacity. So as I release each book, I pause our events because I'm the one that also delivers the events. And so when I'm off doing book tours, it's really difficult for me to do both. Eventually what will happen is that both my husband Charlie and I will wind our off-farm commitments off or back, and we'll come back to being on the farm full time. It's been beautiful. It's been an incredible journey, but it's been an intense journey with 3 kids at our feet as well.
Yeah. And tell me, in terms of, that's kind of the key point of this whole podcast from my viewpoint, is when you get to those critical points where I imagine, just can't go on financially, physically, emotionally. What are the key things that bring you back together? Is it the support of the dream between you? Is it the land? What is it in particular that is your go-to for
Vision
getting
has
strength?
definitely been the thing that's allowed us to jump over any key hurdles. I mean, sometimes the key hurdle is the vision, and so sometimes that can be tricky, and it requires a huge amount of communication to navigate through it. My of my biggest challenges actually was my identity in all of it. I felt like it was very much my husband's identity, and he was the one who wanted to grow apples. And then I've kind of bolted on all of these other more tourism oriented or sort of marketing oriented opportunities. The workshops are really me that drive it. The schools program is me that drives it. The homesteading with all of the moving parts and the animals is me that drives it. And so
What is you? What is the part that you see as you in it?
Well, all of those things are, but the challenge with that is that they add complexity, and they can sometimes dilute both of our ability to focus on what we're actually doing, which is the orchard. And so, that there's sort of paradox and there's tension in that. And so you have to really work with the challenge of that emergence. And sometimes there's not money, and sometimes there's not time, and sometimes there's not either of those things. And that's very genuinely difficult to work through. I've had the fortune of my off-farm work being with Sustainable Table, and that's really the work that we're doing at Sustainable Table is to look at building the new layer of architecture really within the financial system that allows those with funding capability to support the initiatives that are ecologically progressive. So another way of saying that is there's high net worth individuals who see the work that Regen Farm is doing as valuable, and we funnel their money into amazing projects all across Australia. And so that's the work that I'm doing off farm. And so it's so highly aligned that it makes it easier to be a whole person. You as a person that is also ecological farming, that is also educating, that is also doing book tours and talking and also writing books about this stuff. It allows you not to be quite so delineated in the time that you spend on one thing or another, and you just become a whole person that is completely committed to this way of being. It does make it all consuming, which means you can sometimes be exhausted, and I'm sure exhausting to be around.
Well, I know because when I met you that day and you were emceeing, an awesome MC, I might add, um, and you had been up since 2 a.m. harvesting flowers, I think you said, and
Yes, that's right.
and I said 2 a.m, and you said, well, it's the only time I have. And then you'd been up all day, you'd caught the train down 4 hours, and you hadn't eaten anything yet, and it was dinner
Right,
time.
you.
And I went and bought you some food because of this poor woman. She's stood in like, I was the last person served too. I was like, oh God, I'm going to have nothing to give her. So I just bought anything I could see. But I thought, what are you doing to yourself? You've got to have work-life balance in that. I know you're trying to do everything, but there is still, your health and, your
Completely.
sleep.
And look, sometimes there's pinch points across the year. So some seasons are particularly quiet and some seasons are particularly intense. January, February, March for us is particularly intense because our flowers are in full flight, our orchard and our berries are in full flight.
People are around.
Work off. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. We're open every weekend for UPIC and we're running lots of workshops, and I had just launched a book. And so, we're about to get into the next weekend is our last weekend open for harvest here at the orchard. And then we go into a much quieter and deeper hibernation state of existence for a few months. And we genuinely regroup.
And need it. So let's take that moment to talk about, I know you're holding that book down there out of screen. This is the new book, Huddle.
Huddle, yes.
And now tell us a bit about
creating,
what it is. It's massive.
Yeah, creating a tomorrow of togetherness. And really, I wrote my first book, Future Steading, 4 years ago now off the back of the fires. And my husband, who had been a long time forest firefighter, was away for the better part of 6 weeks during the 2019-2020 fires.
Which were massive.
He had been away for incredibly long days and big stints, and I was managing the farm and the kids and the incessant smoke on my own, and really had this sense that there was this kind of galvanizing of Australia's rural and city cousins alike starting to realize that maybe we really did have an ecological problem on our hands, and that things like fire and flood were becoming more regular, and that we probably needed to do something. And I had grown up in a way that I had learned a lot of sort of back to the land type homesteading skills, but we felt like that language didn't resonate with many people because there aren't that many back to the land, as most of us are living in cities, and land accessibility is problematic, and not everybody had made an early 20s decision to move to some rundown shack in the middle of the country like we had. And so we needed to speak to a broader population of people who could make decisions based on the outcome being life, not the outcome being extractive. And so that was really about creating a steady future. So I coined the term future steading in the hope that people would all find a way to contribute to that way of being. And so really my thinking was that anybody could future stead, even if they were in an apartment in the city. They could grow a pot of mint, they could join their local food co-op, they could participate in clothes swaps, they could host, seasonal rituals. They could really participate in a way that became less apathetic and really active and alive and really observational. And all the little tiny small things like swelling buds on flowers and putting bare feet on the earth and, spending less time consuming and more time kind of actively connecting would be a great place to begin. So that was future steading, and that was very much about how people could take agency in their own lives.
But as of 2019, you did that in 2019, you were doing it?
I did that in 2020.
So just after the fires?
The fires were really the impetus because people were saying to me all the time, you've got lots of skills that allow us all to reconnect with the stuff we should be doing. Why don't you write a book? And I was forever scrawling recipes and, ideas on how people could raise chickens or milk goats or I don't know, all the stuff that people were asking me for, I was scrawling in my illegible handwriting on the back of envelopes. And
so I'm going to pause you. I'm going to pause you at that point. So in that point, like those fires, for people who may not be as conscious as we are, particularly in other countries, those fires were so significant. The smoke hit the snowfields of Chile from us, and I thought. Well, I thought in 2011 people would take notice of the fires, and they really didn't. 2019, that was extraordinary fires, and the global awareness started to rise up. Canada started having them. There was a lot more about them. And now recently there's the LA fires. Now, I could say a lot of things about all those things, but I wonder, because I know when you did that book, you also then did a tour through America with it. And what have you noticed in rising awareness? Because Americans are great when they get on board, and they seem to take a while to wake up, but then when they get on board, they're so much better at getting everything together and promoting and marketing. And, I just wonder, what was your feeling about it at that point?
At that point, what I felt like was that there was still a genuine focus on the individual. And I can see that there is a real need for individuals to rebuild skills and rebuild new rhythms and new rituals and new initiations and rewrite story. But I think that focus on the individual actually takes away from the capacity and the power of the collective. And so I think what I discovered as I was doing my book tour, and I did over 200 events in both Australia and in the US.
Wow.
Was that it's actually the power of the collective that has the ability to truly move the needle and to potentially bring those grassroots initiatives up to meet some of the top-down initiatives that are always much slower to meet the need or the desire and drive of the collective. And so I wrote the second book, really, which was about saying we can have all the skills we like in our back pocket, but as long as we continue to beat to a drum of true individualism, then we actually haven't got the ability to return to the humanity that we were designed to be.
And what was the response that you were getting when you were travelling and trying to put that message
incredibly
across?
Strong, because people were saying, I just feel this deep need for relearning all of these things. I know that somewhere deep inside me, I know how to do this stuff and I want to do this stuff, but I just never had anyone to learn from. There aren't elders, there aren't wisdom keepers, there aren't these skills in my community. It doesn't feel sort of tangible enough to learn the skills just by looking at online tutorials. I really want to do this in relation to others, another human. And so incredibly positive response. And that has then flow on because people then visit us at our farm and they come to our workshops, and schools groups pick up different programs, and you end up with this sort of amazing movement of people around you, and you start to feel like you're in a bit of a bell jar of incredible change. But you've only got to pop outside of your bell jar to realize that business as usual is still thrumming, and that growth narrative and that endless consumption narrative is still pretty bloody strong. It's dominating. And really that has disconnected us from what it truly means to be human and operate at a human pace and in a human way that is in complete cohesion with the natural world that holds us. And so that denaturing was something that was of great concern to me, and along with denaturing comes our inability to really find compromise in the collective. And so that individual piece, I realised I had sort of fed into that with the way I'd approached future steading, trying to get everybody to upskill. And I realised that what we actually need is a more collective story, and that might require different language. It might require different tools. It might require us to go back to dancing and singing and writing poetry and sitting on the earth in circles and, finding different, more simplistic ways to celebrate.
I think it's interesting I think it's interesting you bring that up because I think there's such a tremendous fear with robots and people taking over jobs. This sort of, AI is going to take over. Where will we all be? How will we earn money? And you are stepping into a chamber of fear that people have because they only know the internet, the work for that consumerism thing. And I feel rather than, say, attacking people for their consumerism, because to me, consumerism is a sense of a void inside oneself that you're filling with materialism. So rather than attacking that, instead saying, oh, look, you can consumerize, let's say, for the want of a better word, this connection, and the fact that you're creating that little wave and stepping into saying, why don't you come and do part of this? I think it's a very good time for that. I think you'll make
people
that
have
happen.
real appetite for it, and it really sits quite deep inside you. There is a sense of, and Tyson Yunkaporta says right story. Lots of people that I've interviewed for my own podcast say being in right relationship. And you sort of know yourself when you're in right relationship with something. It feels deeply satisfying and satiating for your soul. And you kind of know that your body knows what you're doing and knows that it wants more of it when you're doing it. And, I find that sitting in a women's circle or sitting on the earth around a fire or, sitting in song or, just being outside with your hands in the dirt, that they're relatively accessible to most people, but they are ritualistic practices that very few of us make time for now. And they're not noisy, they're very quiet, and they're very humbling, and they're very deeply connecting, not only to yourself, but to those who are in the circle with you, but also to the landscape that you're sitting on and in. And it gives you some peace and quiet without that endless shouting of more and more and more. So it allows you the space to redefine what enough is to you and what it is that success looks like and how you might kind of navigate towards that for you in your world, because everybody's worlds and circumstances are entirely different. So there sort of needs to be a reframing of how we're navigating our lives.
I like that because I think that people do forget how many people live in a box in a building that's so devoid. Most people, and we, particularly in Australia, we're very blessed for space, and compared to a lot of places on the planet. And I think about those people because, of course, they would not like space because they've been conditioned to no space. But that doesn't mean they don't want connection. And I think about, there was a Toni Collette movie, I think it's called Japanese Story. I saw it many years ago. And it's about this she's working I think she's running a mining thing. She's so tough. And she has this Japanese executive who's the son of whoever the big investors are for the mine or something. And she's been told as the token woman to go and take him around. She's really furious about it. And she takes him out he wants to go out into the deep, deep desert where you just don't, like, you die, and she's like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And the story is,
Yes.
yeah, you've seen it many years ago. It's always struck me because he's someone from such a different culture. He's come from Japan. It's all money and all these social things that are so, there's not even a vague semblance of connection, and they fall in love in this most unusual way. And I think about that thing, this point of connection, and where, let's say you and I possibly both look for connection through land. You're trying to access connection through community, and whatever angle, whether it's touch points of music or dance or poetry or
and not just connection, but belonging, deep belonging. Yeah. And knowing that in that belonging there is mutual aid that will come as needed, and there is reciprocity. That belonging will ensure that you're stable and held, but in return you will contribute to that for others.
And so are you getting people traveling from other cultures to visit you through your work? Are you finding that more and more?
Yes,
people
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. People, I mean, we're easy to find here at Blackburn Farm because we're in the same place. But the opportunity to really, people say, why did you write a second book? Really, because I want to go to other communities and have conversations. Because when you're in a community, it only takes a few minutes for you to be able to kind of read the room and feel the language and the culture of the community that you're sitting in. You can sow some seeds, you can sort of sprinkle some ideas on the table, and then really what happens is quite magic. That community takes those seeds up and they make it their own. They turn it into something that works for them in their landscape and with their people, with their existing frameworks. And I think that's really what we need to be encouraging, is for people to take ownership of what the new pathway looks like for them in their environment. And so that's really why I wrote a second book. It was to sow some seeds that allowed other people to then connect in a way that made sense.
And did you research the book by going and visiting people, or are you expecting to sow those seeds more by promoting the book in those places?
No, both. Yeah. So I had done a huge, and also my podcast. So having spoken to over 200 people from different countries and different places and different ways of life and different systems, some people are on this earth to work in agriculture, and other people are working in health, and other people are working in, natural medicines, and whatever it was, I just had so many different insights from so many incredible humans doing just the most bloody amazing things, that it made me realize that I was in a really fortunate position to kind of coalesce some of that wisdom and to share that in a singular location, and then to take that to places. My toolkit feels full. So I feel like when I go into places and people sort of push in one direction, I can say, well, I know what's working for someone else looks like this. Have you looked them up, or does that feel like it resonates? I think having a strong First Nations lens as well. I'm not, but the organisation I work with has a First Nations first approach. We're working in ag, and so there is this sort of elephant in the room around land ownership and land access. So this is something that is sort of top of mind for me all the time, and the Indigenous wisdom that is still so generously and willingly shared to those who are intentionally trying to rewrite our story, I think is so important, that I try to make sure and the very first thing I do with every conversation I have is open with my acknowledgement in here. That is quite a long body of words, but I think it then sets the tone for people to realise that Indigenous wisdom, which is not separated in any way, shape or form, and not trying to control our relationship with the natural world in any way, is sort of the foundation that we all need to be getting back to.
I like that you talk about bridging it, because I feel a lot of the time when people talk about the Indigenous, they make out like it's somebody else's journey as opposed to our own. I mean, I think that's just because it's become this compulsory thing that government people have to do. So you have maybe three people saying this speech over and over again, and it's just
Yeah.
horrible. Because
Yes. It's
I
empty.
feel
It means nothing.
it's so empty, and I feel it's like, and then of course there's the, I hear over and over again about Aboriginals. There's so few of them left that actually have the wisdom because of the stolen generation, and they don't. A lot of them won't give over information, which is completely their right not to. But I worry about it being lost because of that, and it's really lovely to hear that you are having people willing to share, because I think the reality is the people that I've spoken to or heard speak that really talk about we have to change that narrative. It has to be about all of us. It has to be an equal thing, because I think people are more and more separated from land by this tremendous disparity of the haves and the have-nots and the wealth. And so we have to find another way in to communicate what value is and where heart lies, no matter what money a person has. And I think that's really important to hear you talking about that, particularly through stories and connection, points of connection, whatever they are, because I think there are a lot more points of connection than people realize. And often
And
words are the
more
thing that
points of
separates us.
connection than disparity. I think there's more ability to connect than not connect with people. We just have to actively seek those points of collaboration opportunity, really.
I agree, and I see that because at the moment I'm doing this thing where I'm working in an area that's all jargon I don't know, and I'm having to sort of work out. I mean, apart from learning what the words mean, I'm trying to translate them into words as well that mean something to other people. Like I find it so interesting that, for instance, I'm in the carbon space and the farmers are as opposed to it as the buyers, and you're like, don't you both realize this is actually for both of you? Like, if you don't have the farmers, you've got no food. And
Yeah.
farmers, if you don't get paid for nurturing biodiversity and land and soil and water, you probably won't survive, because the market, the people in the middle that buy you food and fiber, are not going to pay more because they've actually got not a lot of money, and their values are not around health and all those things that we might have. So I'm always fascinated by how do you change the words to make them resonate with people, and that connection thing that you're talking is so lovely. I love hearing what you're saying you're doing.
Sometimes there aren't words. I think storytelling, by nature needs to be a two-way scenario. You need to respond to those that are in the room, and you need to give them opportunity for input as well. So I think a story that is the richest version of itself always has more than one storyteller, and it always speaks to the community that you're in. So I think it's as much about listening as it is using the words to evoke different ways of thinking and being. But I think that takes real patience and real trust in the other humans that are in the room to be able to contribute as well.
And do you think that we're at a time where people are going to be willing to open up in that way? Because there is this, perhaps your observation that there is this move from away from self. Because I've got to say, I just keep seeing self everywhere, and I haven't seen much movement at all. But you're in a very different space than me, so I'm curious to see what, if anything, you are observing.
Yeah, so that's that bell jar I was talking about before. You feel like the whole world must be moving into this way of being because that's all you're seeing. But you're right. The mainstream media is perpetuating self like it never has before. And I think if you actively step away from that, what you see are those who are leaning right into this way of being. And there are more than there have ever been before. And I think that's an intrinsic knowledge that this is the way we're supposed to be. Since the beginning of time, humanity has relied on one another and self hasn't survived. And the only reason self is now surviving is because we have such an abundance of low cost fossil fuels that has enabled us to create mansions of our own and put walls around our owned title and, pay the bill to remove the need for negotiation and compromise and conversation. And so I think relearning those skills of of what it truly means to be human is a really steep learning curve, but actually we know it. It's in our bones. It's in our bones and it's in our ancestral DNA. We know how to do this. And we're not just humans that operate from our headspace, but, as custodial beings that are born to be integrated into the natural landscape. If you listen to Bill Plotkin, we are born with an ecological soul, and that is our first membership. That is the thing we are born to do. Our bodies know this to be true. It's just that our modern world actually beats that out of us and takes our ability to be true to it away from us. And so if you return back to your ecological soul calling, you inevitably navigate your way back to people who are also supporting this work and having these conversations and leaning into this way of being. We know how to do this. We've just forgotten. It wasn't so very long ago that we were doing this and we had no choice but to. But, cheap fossil fuels have allowed a whole lot of fat and a whole lot of self to thrive. And that's not the reality of the world we're heading into.
Well, I'd like to touch on now on that point, because you mentioned that you actually have your investors that are or people with money that are coming and putting stuff in, which I imagine is predominantly philanthropic, but there would be also investment with return and all that sort of things. And you were saying how strongly those that do come out to you are really wanting that connection. Would you like to sort of just touch on that a little bit about what you've experienced in that space?
So just to be really clear, because people don't often understand the different hats, my farm is Black Barn Farm, and that's with my husband and my children. My books are Jade Miles author, and the podcast is Jade Miles podcaster, but that's Future Steading. But my off-farm work is with Sustainable Table, and so that we work with a number of philanthropic funders, and we do definitely have investors that are around the sidelines as well. Predominantly this work though is so transformative and there's a really high potential of failure. I hate using the word failure because there's always so much that can be learned and gleaned from things that don't go as planned. And we share those widely, but there's such a high degree of really far horizon thinking and courage to try these new ways of being that really it's only philanthropy that is willing to back some of these experiments. So we work really closely with a pretty small clutch of deeply connected, educated, systems understanding philanthropists who can see the power of regenerative agriculture to arrest, I want to say ecological collapse, but it always sounds a bit dramatic when I say it. But I will say it because I think that's the reality that we're facing into. And, they realise that in a country like Australia, where more than 60% of our land mass is owned by private ownership and farmed for agricultural purposes, actually what we need to do is be implementing regenerative agricultural practices rapidly, because that has the ability, as some of your other guests have already said, it has the ability to sequester carbon in a way that mainstream commodity production methods do not. It has the ability, most importantly, to reframe our relationship with the natural world so that we're no longer looking at it as an extractive or a commodity that we can extract from, but a commodity that we need to work in deep harmony with and collectively with and regenerate the landscape that we've done such a massive extractive effort on and essentially broken its back. So we work with funders who understand that. We work with funders who realise the enormity of its capacity, but also the enormity of the change and cultural change that is required in order to make that happen. Most of them are based on relationships that are founded around trust. And so they're not asking us for arbitrary measurement and evaluation at the end of every project, but instead they're happy to sit around and yarn with us and hear the stories and the anecdotal evidence of the change to culture, the change to community, the change to landscape, and the ability to share this knowledge and expand, practice change in other places. So mostly that trust piece is the piece that we rely on, but there's very few of those funders. I could count them on one hand, really, that are happy to kind of hop into bed with us and just trust that we'll work with the farmers that are doing the right thing, that will have long and deep legacy left behind.
Has your book helped in any way with the outreach into your book and your podcast? Has it helped in any way with getting more funders in because you are bridging all those points?
I'd love to say yes. I would love for that to have been the case. But I think sadly, no. I think the work that I do on my farm and in my book, which speaks in a language that is mine, is quite different to the language that I use when I'm speaking with funders, and it's quite different to the way I engage with funders because they come from a really different paradigm. They come from a really different world. The investment world is, it doesn't want to sit on the earth, and it doesn't want to close its eyes, and it doesn't want to imagine what this landscape looked like 200 years ago before colonisation, and it doesn't want to talk about trust rather than investment return. So, I think I'm much more comfortable speaking about the things that I know to be true for Jade Miles in a language that makes sense for me, that is defined by my definition of enough.
Yeah.
Which is quite different to funders. Funders' level of enough, for the most part, is usually looking at still some level of extractive return. And so there is still a long way to go in building that bridge because they are different paradigms.
Do you see a way in which it will get to a point where it does flow and the financial world does flow in keeping with the song of the land? Because I see a lot more potential than people realize in it.
Yeah.
Because I think even the people on the land have not yet actually accessed their full potential, which is something I touched on with Jane. There's so much more than we realize, but we've got to also unlearn stuff in ourselves and find things that are deeper. So I'm hopeful, but I'm curious to see where you see it because you're sitting really much more in it.
I'm definitely hopeful too. And every time I bring a group of funders to our farm and my two worlds collide, and I ask them to take their shoes off and sit on the ground and close their eyes and truly to imagine this landscape 200 years ago when the Palangang Madang people walked it and knew where the water flowed and knew where the sun fell and knew where the plants were that healed and nourished their people. When I ask them to understand that they have enabling capability through the funds that they can generously donate to initiatives that are similar to the one we've run. We've never received funding, but we have lots of other incredible farmers doing this sort of work in places all over Australia. When they see and feel the tangibility of the fundamental difference in the way we're approaching landscape management to the way mainstream commodity production is, we get lots of tears. We get lots of really visible aha moments. We get deep gratitude for generously sharing the space that we have intentionally created as a wild, biodiverse landscape. I do. I think it's slow because I think you can put one person on the ground and they have that incredible experience, but then they have to take it back to their teams, and their teams are working in environments that are still looking at all of the business as usual metrics, and those metrics don't consider how people feel or how people are responding in a local community, or what the price point is for the farmer, or what the cost of production is for the farmer, or what the biological loss is in that landscape. Or, they're often invisible metrics that are really hard to tangibly measure. And so, then there's this massive gap between those who felt it and understood it and those who are still looking at paradigm that is looking for outcomes that are unattainable sometimes. So I definitely feel hope, but I think it's slow and I think it relies on trust, and that can't be hurried. Those relationship building opportunities can't be hurried because then you feel a bit pushy and a bit salesy, and nothing ever comes from someone trying to push a sales lens on you. So I definitely feel hope. And I definitely feel like there is an ever-growing network across agricultural sectors and across different landscapes for this way of being, but I am not sure how long it will take.
And I think this is yet again just speaks to your resilience and your mental or spiritual or whatever word you want to use, capacity to sit in that uncertainty and find your own certainty. And that's kind of the point that we're really looking at, is that some people just lose hope because they can't find the certainty. And you seem to have navigated a lot of uncertainty and found your own certainty. And that seems to be, even if you wait,
definitely the natural world, and it's definitely the seasonal rhythm. So for me to find certainty, I look to the outside landscape, and right now I'm looking at the tips of leaves just starting to change. So I know that we're getting close to the end of harvest, and we'll soon be moving into that deep hibernation period where recuperation can happen. But for me, it's putting my hands in the dirt. It's knowing when I save seeds. It's knowing when I grow food. It's knowing how we mark the year by observing into the natural world. That provides a huge amount of certainty for me. And with it comes ritual and opportunities for gatherings and opportunities for sharing abundance and opportunities for solidarity with other people. And all of those things provide certainty and immense hope.
That's wonderful. So will you now, the next thing for you be to take the book and start promoting it through winter? Is that your goal, which is summer in the northern countries? Will you go back to America?
No, I'm not going back to America. I'm going to the UK. It officially launches on the 29th of April globally. And I've got quite a lot of events that I'm doing right across Australia until I head to the UK in July. And then when I get back, the Australian tour resumes, and I've got about 20 or 30 events between September and December booked in. So there's lots more to land. And if anyone's listening to this, they'll say, I've asked you if you'll do an event and you haven't come back to me. And it's really that I kind of cluster them, because I can't come to WA for one event and then back again in 6 weeks. So I really have to work out how to cluster events and bring myself to regions in a really practical way.
Let me ask you this. How will you recuperate? That's your downtime that you're taking up. Having watched you do 2 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock without
That's a really good question. Yeah. I will recuperate by putting my hands in the dirt. So actually,
but you're not even
when I come back,
well,
I will when I get back, actually. So the role that I have with Sustainable Table as CEO at the moment is soon to transition into a smaller executive role. And so I won't be in the day-to-day of that, and I will be on my own ground more often here in the northeast of Victoria. And
so the month of May, you'll be home.
No, I will be home in June. It'll be pretty quiet. There's no events in June, and I'm still in Australia in June, and I will be closed for harvest. And so it'll just be being here. It'll be daily sit spots. It'll be daily hole digging. It'll be daily rhythms of collecting eggs or feeding animals, or, planning out next year's. Lots of fires. Yeah. Lots of walks in the bush. Yeah, it'll be freezing here. We get snow here.
Yeah. Beechworth, I know it's cold in Beechworth.
Cold. And we're higher again. We're a couple of 100 meters higher in altitude, so we get even colder. Yeah, it's chilly.
Wonderful. Oh, well, that's great. All right, look, I know you have to go to another call very soon, and I've loved talking to you, Jade. I think that what you're doing is fantastic, and I hope that this lends inspiration for those that are perhaps trying to navigate a way to change from one to another, or just to dip their toe in the soil and understand that they are all connected to it, whether they do anything in the land or not, and see where the future brings.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to chat. Thank you.
Okay, and good luck with the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.